This is Office Talk with Annette Stepanian. Hi everyone, this is Annette Stepanian, and today's guest is basically building her business empire one piece of confetti at a time. If you don't know Jessica Serra Huizenga, she is the owner of the Confetti Bar, where she primarily creates custom confetti to help spread happiness and joy. Since I met her a few years ago, she has expanded her creative pursuits to not only include the confetti, but also to become a self-published author. And she's also the co-creator of the Monarch workshop. And it's a weekend workshop where creatives and business owners can come together to work on their business with other like-minded entrepreneurs. In my conversation with Jessica, we're going to be talking about how she made the leap to start the Confetti Bar, some challenges she faces as a product-based entrepreneur, how she makes the time to go ahead and really stay creative, and much more. Let's go to the show. Hey everybody, I'm here today with Jessica Serra Huizenga, and if you don't know her, she is the queen of all things confetti. She has her hands in a whole bunch of different creative projects, so I'm super excited to have you here today, Jessica. Thanks for coming.
Well, thank you for having me.
Okay, so you and I met a few years ago when I was running my jewelry line called Confetti by Annette. I think we met at a Barnes & Noble.
We did.
And you brought me all this
I remember
confetti.
it like it was yesterday.
It's crazy to see how far you've come. I feel like it was only maybe 2.5 years ago, but I find your story really interesting because you were working in sales at a book publishing company and you decided, I'm going to quit my job and make confetti. So can you tell our listeners about that journey? Because I'm sure a lot of people probably thought you were a little nuts.
A little bit. More than a little bit. All right, so I'll take you back. So I graduated from college and I got my degree in English, and that was the start of everybody being like, oh, what the hell are you going to do with that? So book publishing was what I kind of, had wanted to do. I'd always loved to read. My mom's a librarian. My brother likes to write. And it was just sort of something I was always really interested in. I did an internship when I was in college at a book publisher. So I was like, I want to do this. I wanted to be in editing, but the only job I could get that was in my area here in Connecticut was at a smaller publisher, and it was in sales. So I was like, all right, I'll just take it and see what happens. I was mainly selling like books on outdoor recreation and like rock climbing and stuff like that, which is totally not my forte.
Yeah,
but
totally not your jam.
So, but I picked up a lot and I learned a lot. And, we published some other like cookbooks and stuff like that. So it was nice to kind of get exposure into that. But I've always done creative things on the side. As long as I can remember, I used to oil paint when I was younger. I used to make jewelry. I have done scrapbooking and crafts and, kind of anything and everything. And I had actually, throughout college and things, I started one blog and then I would kind of start a jewelry blog and then I tried to sell some jewelry and, I kind of like went all over the place, but nothing ever really stuck. So I guess, I don't know if anyone knows, like you can buy bags of like mixed sequins and confetti and stuff at some craft stores.
Yes.
And I used to buy them and I literally just used to like sit and sort the different shapes like into little individual containers just for like the fun of it. And I guess it was relaxing.
It is relaxing, actually.
It is. And I've always like had a thing for miniature things. Anything small or tiny was just like, I was all about it. So so I had like all this confetti and I didn't really do anything with it. I just would have it in these containers and I would just look at it. But one day, I guess I was really thinking about it and I was like, confetti, it's one of those things everyone, kind of talks about it. And, it's like one of those symbols where you're like, oh, I have confetti in my hair and, that kind of thing. And it was supposed to be such a representation of celebration and partying and, everything good and happy. But I was like, nobody actually makes really cool confetti. It's just all of this metallic stuff that's mostly from China and it needs to be more fun. I don't know. So I just started making my own mixes and doing different colors and adding different textures and things like that. And I guess before I kind of had really started making it, I woke up one day and I just told my husband, I was like, I want to start a confetti shop. And he looked at me and he was like, okay. And he's a web designer and developer. So of course I like enlisted him as he made all of my websites. And he was kind of like, he's always very supportive, but I think at this point it was probably my third website he had made for me. And I was like, so I was working full time. We just kind of started it on the side. It was probably around February that I thought of the idea. And, this was the first time for whatever reason. I wish I had like a good reason as to why, but it just felt like it was real. And I felt like I should take it seriously and I should, set it up as a business from day one and like really pay attention to getting a resale tax certificate and, really doing things right. So we did all that starting in, like I said, about February of 2013. And then that June 1st, we launched the first version of the site. And the very, very beginning, I was sort of just repackaging bulk metallic confetti that I could purchase, but I would give them like fun names and I put them in these little jars. But the idea from the very beginning was that it was just a place for people to come and kind of, the reason we called it the Confetti Bar was that it was a place where people could come and see all these different mixes of confetti and just sort of like browse through them and see what spoke to them. And then very shortly after we launched that site, that's when I started making my own mixes and doing different, paper colors and different styles and adding ribbon and, anything I could think of to add to these mixes. And then at the time I had a Cricut machine and I started playing around with like cutting little shapes and I was like, oh, that'd be fun to like put some custom things in confetti. And once I sort of had that idea, we knew we wanted to be able to fully customize it and have more control. So we looked into researching some other cutting machines and kind of got that process going. And once we sort of announced we were doing custom confetti, that's when things like took off. And from the time we launched the site to the time I quit my full-time job, it was only 6 months. And it kind of just got to that point where it was like, I could only do so much on nights and weekends and the orders were kind of coming in and I was getting overwhelmed. And I just remember it was like the scariest moment of my life when, I sat down with my husband and, I talked to my mom and my stepdad and got their opinion. And I was like, look, I'm really thinking about doing this. I think I'll be financially okay, but I'm not really sure what's going to happen. And I just remember my mom and my stepdad looked at me and they were like, no offense. Like, they've always been very supportive, but they're like, no offense, but do you honestly think there's like a market for this and you could sell confetti for a living? And I was like, yes, I can. Like, and I was like, I don't know, but I just really felt strongly that people would like it. And, cause I did. So I was like, I can't be the only one. So they were like, well, if you think you could do it, like now's the time. You're young, you kind of have a safety net, you don't have too many responsibilities with kids or, paying for a mortgage or anything like that. So they were like, if you're going to do it now. So it was really helpful that I had their support. So I gave my 2 weeks at my job and I'll never forget my boss at the time. He was a real funny guy. And, book publishing in general has sort of changed. And the company I was working for was sort of at a time when, they were kind of laying some people off and things, even before I had actually started working there, things had changed and, they had let go of a lot of people. And, book publishing is sort of seen as a dying art to many. He just looked at me and he was like, well, something is up when there's more of a market for shredded confetti than there is for printed books. So
it's
that's
sad, but funny.
Yeah. So then once I did that, it was just full steam ahead. And thankfully, I never looked back and have been making confetti ever since and have been doing it full time. I probably worked out of our basement for, I think, about a year and a half or so. And then we got our studio space in March of last year. So we've been here close to a year and a half almost. And yeah, so we've just been making confetti ever since.
I love it. I mean, and that just goes to show, I just think of sometimes like those people who come on Shark Tank and, sometimes maybe like the investors are like, they kind of blow them off because they're selling, things that they don't think there's a market for. And then they're like, well, what are your sales? And then they'll be like, we've made $1.5 million in the last 6 months. And then you just see them all kind of like sit straight, like, oh, okay.
I'll be the first to admit, like, we're by no means millionaires. And, I don't want to paint a picture like, oh, like I just did it and it magically happened. I think it's easy for me to look back and be like, oh, that was easy. Like, I did it, so it must have been fine. But if I really sit and think about it, like, it's been a long road. Even though it's only been 3 years, I feel like it's been like 15. And, the things I've had to learn and the struggles we've had and the sleepless nights and worrying about this and, oh my God, are we going to make the money? And, and I feel very blessed that it has been able to sustain me. But I really see this where we are in this moment as really just the beginning, because we're now just starting to really gain the momentum where it's, I think, a more sustainable business long term. I've learned a lot about selling products and, different streams of revenue and all that kind of stuff, So yes, I do this full time. We have this big, beautiful space. I make a living off of it. We've done more awesome things with confetti than I could even remember right now, but it's not easy, and it's not like I'm just sitting back, like raking in the cash or anything like that.
Absolutely. So, I mean, and that's fair. And I think sometimes, we look at people and from the outside, we say, oh my gosh, that person's so successful. And like, we don't really know what's going behind it, what's happening behind the scenes and like how long it really took somebody and how many failures or hard lessons they had to learn to get to that point. So I think that's a really great transition to talking about what are some of the challenges that you faced, particularly being a product-based business and also you're manufacturing and making your own confetti. So it's not like you're just, importing stuff from China. You're actually hand making the stuff. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges you faced?
Sure. Well, the biggest challenge that we've come across in general is just the fact that they're drawn to our confetti. They love looking at the pictures. They love seeing it. And they're like, wow, that's so cool. But they're like, I don't get it though. Like, what do I do with it? So it's almost like we have created this thing that we don't know how to sell in a way. Because for me, it's always been very much more about, different artistic ways you could use the confetti. And, I do put so much time and effort into making it and designing it that I don't necessarily want people to just think that they throw it and then throw it away. So the biggest struggle is the fact that we did create this very specific product and this very specific niche for ourselves. But that's also been what has helped us be successful because we do stand out and we do have something unique. So it's sort of like a double-edged sword. But, kind of that aside, that's more of like a marketing issue. And the way I deal with that is, honestly, I love what I make so much. And it's something that I sometimes look at and I'm like, I don't even know what I would do with it, but it's so pretty. I want it. So I just really, sit back, and that's why I do the blog projects and try and give people different ideas to use it and really make it about, the reason you're celebrating something and having like a special memento for that. So it's not necessarily about the confetti itself. It's about what you're using it for and why you want it to be special and colorful and fun. So that's sort of like more the marketing end of it. From a physical standpoint, just learning how to run a business where you're selling products can be a challenge in itself. How to price them, getting a resale tax certificate, how to figure out shipping, and just even the systems you put in place in order to fulfill those orders, So yeah, I would say that that's probably the biggest challenge in a product-based business is just figuring out not only how you're going to sell the product, but the logistics of actually getting it out into the world.
Yeah. And I think especially like what you're selling, like I said, you're hand making it, and it's such a low, like the price is at such a low price point that like your margins, you don't have a lot of room to play with. It's not like you're bringing in, $50 with every order profit. It's a few dollars probably. And I know you've worked some pretty big brands with your custom confetti. What was that process like? Have they just reached out to you? Like, what can you tell our audience about working with bigger brands when you're running a product-based business?
So I know this is going to be like horribly unhelpful, but because we were very lucky that I guess, because our product was unique and, it was something different, people hadn't seen it. We had a lot of organic social media growth right from the beginning. And to be perfectly honest, I really haven't done any sort of traditional advertising. I never really put myself out there to any of these brands. They just ended up, people were posting about our company. We collaborated with some bloggers and things like that. And then these people just, I guess, started finding us online. So pretty much all of the bigger companies that I have gotten the chance to work with, they've reached out to me or they found us on social media. And, and it's kind of, I've learned it's sort of all about who you know. And there have been people like, never would know who they are. And it turns out they are the sales director at Kate Spade or, whatever. And then they told their friend and, so it just sort of bred very organically. I will say, though, we are kind of at the point now where we sort of have taken it as far as we can, just sort of on that natural word of mouth. I mean, we definitely are still getting a lot of that word of mouth and organic internet searching. Now we're really finding that we kind of have to take that extra step, and we're working on different, marketing campaigns and different things that we can reach an even larger audience, because it's very easy for me to get overwhelmed and, I'm making these orders and, I have worked for some of these companies. So it's easy for me to think the world is very small, and I'm kind of like, okay, that's it. I've peaked. Like, that's all there is to it. But then I have to sit back and realize, well, no, like a majority of people still don't know about us. So, how do we reach them, and how do we really expand this into the brand that we want it to be? So that's sort of another challenge we have right now, is taking it to that next step and being able to fulfill the orders. Because yes, I do at this point hand make every single batch of confetti that leaves our studio.
Do you physically hand make everything, or do you have help? Please tell me you have help.
Well, so
please tell me
my husband Clifford, he co-owns the business with me. So he still works full time at another job, but thankfully it's only 2 miles down the road. So he helps with all of the kind of digital stuff. So he'll design all the custom files that we cut digitally, and he'll help me with designing some of like the printed materials, and he maintains the back end of the website and anything like that. But in terms of physically making the confetti right now, it's just me.
Really? I did not know that.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
It is.
That's amazing.
So yes, we do have a machine that helps to cut the actual custom pieces, but
I've seen your custom pieces. You were kind enough to make me something. Like, you have to like pop out, like it'll be a word, and you have to like pop out the like negative space, right?
Right. And each piece is cut individually, and it has to be cut kind of multiple times. So it's a very time-consuming process, which is the downside. And it's one of those things where like the more we have to make, it doesn't make it any cheaper. Whereas a lot of businesses, if you order in bulk, you get a discount. But
exactly.
For the custom pieces, it's just, each piece has to be cut individually. So there's no, making it faster or quicker. So that's a big challenge that we run into. And we've had to turn away a lot of business because of the fact that there's only so much we can physically produce at a certain cost. And nobody really wants to pay crazy amounts of money for confetti, because at the end of the day, it is confetti.
Yeah.
But yes, each of the custom pieces has to be cut individually. So I'll have to set up the machine and, monitor those. I purchase paper and things like that, but I shred all of the paper because I pick specific colors that I want. So I shred that all. And then I do buy like metallic shred and stuff like that in bulk, but I hand mix it all into each and every batch. So
I mean, I respected you already, but like this is a whole other level of respect. And like, it's funny because I have some of your confetti, and like I don't want to like use it because, and now especially because I know that so much goes into it, it's almost like a piece of art that you just want to preserve. And I know that as you grow, hopefully you'll get help. So I feel like I got like an original Jessica, like masterpiece right there. Yeah,
it is. And that's what I've kind of come to realize, because that's actually been a struggle for me, because I don't think I was really cut out to be in a retail business. And I know that's terrible of me to say because I run a retail business, but just the thought of mass producing products on a large scale, that doesn't really excite me. I think I've always been more of an artist, and I've actually started calling myself a confetti artist because I've been branching out into doing more like, fun photography and, creating things with the confetti. So it's not even just about creating the mixes. It's about that next step. What do I do with it afterwards? And, I spell out words with it, and I draw little pictures with confetti and, things like that. So I've really sort of have tried to take that into the brand, and it's, I'm a confetti artist, and I have a happiness brand that involves a lot of confetti, but it isn't always just about, hey, I make this mix and then sell it to you, and that's the end of the story. If that makes any sense.
It totally makes sense, and I totally identify with that, because I know when I was running my jewelry brand, I felt the same way. First of all, I just did not feel like myself standing at a trade show trying to sell and push products on people. Right. And I felt the same way. Like, I wanted my jewelry to have a certain quality, a certain standard. I wanted it to be made in America. And, there's a certain sacrifice that you make with that, because most buyers or consumers are cost conscious. And it comes at a price. If you're making necklaces manufactured in America with authentic, Swarovski crystals in it, it's going to cost a lot more than another piece of fashion jewelry that you might pick up at Forever 21, for instance. And so I know that I struggled with that. Like, oh, do I need to compromise? Because A, this is what everybody else is doing, but B, like, that's where it seems like the profits are. So you're not alone. That's my point. I think, and people who view they see themselves as craftsmen and view it as a craft versus a business. I think they come across that a lot, just that conflict. So
it is. Yeah, no, I definitely see that. And, I'm not a millionaire, so, my family was never like super rich or anything. So I have always been like cost conscious. So sometimes I'll look at something and I'm like, oh, gee, like I would never pay that much for that. And then I think about it, owning a business, it really has opened my eyes. And I'm like, well, I understand why they have to charge that much. Like, and, even knowing all that, I'm like, how are they even making a profit?
Yeah.
So it is very hard to sort of reconcile the two things, okay, I need to have a business, I need to make money, but I also, have this art and, I don't want to just kind of, sell out and manufacture it somewhere else or whatever. So it definitely has been a struggle for us. And, we do get pushed back on our pricing for a lot of things. People are like, oh, it's just shredded paper. What do I need to pay this much for? Whatever. And, that's fine. Like, I get it. And I know that I'm not going to be for everybody. And if you don't want to pay that, like, go make your own. Like, I'm totally cool with that. Like, I can't please everybody. But if you really want something that is specially designed and hand mixed and, it's very special and unique, then I'll be more than happy to make your confetti for you.
Yeah.
Like I said, we're still looking for that next way to expand and to offer more options for people at a lower cost. And, I can't say where we're going to end up or how that's going to happen, but we are looking into some ways that we can hopefully produce some custom shapes on a larger scale. But it is expensive, and there's just only so much, we can do to cut back on cost, which is why I really feel strongly about the Confetti Bar now being a brand that is a happiness brand. And it stands for, we recently relaunched our site and kind of redesigned the whole thing this past June for our third anniversary, because I really felt like I came to terms with the fact that I want to be more on that artist side and I want to have a brand versus a product. So our new tagline is because happiness should be celebrated. So I'm really sort of using that as like, I always have that in the back of my mind for anything I do. And I'm like, okay, how can we, share this message with people and still have the color and the fun of all of our confetti, but it's not just about these physical mixes that I have to hand make. And that's where I am getting more into doing, like I said, the photographs and things like that. Unfortunately, I can't say too much about a lot of things that I have in the works, but there are things that I've been working on and we'll kind of see where they end up. But and I think there'll be ways to share the confetti without it necessarily being the physical confetti that I make.
Yeah, and I think it's part of a larger story. It's a part of an experience. And so people might then buy the confetti thinking like, oh, I want to participate or have a memento or something that represents that experience. And it's not necessarily, well, because I'm having a party for my 3-year-old and I need confetti. It's not like filling a practical need. It's more of an emotional need.
Right.
So let's talk about, I know you have your hands in a lot of different projects. And it's so funny because every time we email, the little like signature line where you write like your title and what you do, I feel like it keeps getting longer and longer. And, and it's just so inspiring. So I know you went back to your true love, which was writing and all of that. And you recently published a book. You are also a co-founder of a workshop for other creatives and entrepreneurs, the Monarch Workshop. So let's start with the book. Tell me a little bit more about what that process was like, just getting down and just giving birth to a book.
Right. So back in the summer of 2014, I actually got really sick and I started to have these really bad panic attacks, like to the point where I couldn't function. And I've always sort of, been told I had anxiety and stuff, and kind of going back when I was in college, within 2 years we lost both of my maternal grandparents to cancer 6 months apart, and then the next year my dad was killed in a motorcycle accident. And all this sort of bad stuff happened in a very short period of time, and I was just going into like my senior year of college, so it's like already like a really crazy time for you and you don't know what you're doing. So I had a doctor tell me I had anxiety and they prescribed me medication and I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. And it was sort of something that I lived lived with, and it never like interfered with my day-to-day life, but I certainly, looking back now, can see how, I sort of lived with this constant anxiety and worrying about bad things happening and, all of this. But even still, after going through all that, started the confetti business, I started doing it full time, and, I would have said that I was very happy. I didn't have anything major to complain about in my life. I was very lucky. I was very blessed to be doing this. So when I started having these panic attacks that literally I couldn't get out of bed, I couldn't function, I was like, something is seriously wrong with me. And, I started doing, and I've always been like a very like self-motivated person, as you'll see hearing about all of my different projects. But I like refused to just sit back and be like, oh, this is what's happening. So I, started seeing a psychiatrist. I went to the doctor. I would talk to anybody and I'm like, please, like, just help me. I got blood work done. I got, all this sort of stuff. And everyone just kept telling me, oh, like, you had a traumatic experience in your life, so you just have anxiety. You need to be on medication. And I just refused to believe that. So I don't even know exactly how it happened, but my mom had basically introduced me to the idea of like, naturopathic medicine and sort of, more natural remedies for things. So I started seeing a naturopath as my sort of last resort because I really did not want to be on medication for the rest of my life to deal with this. Because in my mind, I was like, I was okay and then I wasn't. Something must have happened. So I ended up in the emergency room, like all this sort of stuff. So I started seeing a naturopath and he did a bunch of, different tests and, for my neurotransmitters and my food sensitivities and all this. And long story short, we basically found out that I had something called Candida, which is a yeast overgrowth in your body, where basically it shuts down your entire like digestive system and it takes over. It makes you crave, sugar and all the things that yeast needs to eat and survive. And it basically takes over your body and makes you feel bad in all sorts of different ways. So kind of going through all of that, so once I started to feel better, I sort of always had it in my mind, like, oh, I would love to write a book someday. I would love to write a book someday. And then because I was feeling great, and I was like, you know what? Why can't that someday be today? So I was like, I'm just going to start writing a book. And it was funny because I didn't tell anybody except my husband that I was even working on it. Like, not my mom, like nobody. And I was like, I just want to see if I can do this for myself. And, I was still obviously doing everything else full time at the Confetti Bar and all of that. So I would just like go home at night and that would be like my escape. And I would just sit there and I would write and figure it out. And I hired a freelance editor once I kind of had what I thought was a first draft and, hired a cover designer and, did all this on my own without any sort of feedback from anybody I knew. And it wasn't until I knew that the book was coming out and I had it finished that I told anyone that I had done it. And it took me probably about a year from the time I started writing it until it was kind of ready to be published. And everyone was like completely shocked, especially I wrote a contemporary romance. And so it's a little bit of an 18 plus book. It's a love story, and that's what I've always loved, love stories. And I'm like a sucker for anything romantic. So yeah, I'm just really having a lot of fun writing them. But I will say that when I was writing the first one, when nobody knew, it was like the most relaxing thing ever. And then as soon as people knew that I was writing, I like immediately could not think of a single word. I would like stare at a blank page and I was like, this is so interesting. Like, especially with the Confetti Bar, I I feed off of everyone's feedback. Do people like this photo? What are they commenting? And what do they want to see from me? And what do they want in their confetti? And, I'm constantly like looking for feedback and for people to give me their opinion. And I love that, but it was actually really refreshing to have something that was just for me. And I didn't have to have all that outside noise sort of complicating things.
Yeah.
So I highly recommend trying something that's just for you with no expectations and just seeing where it goes.
I tell my husband that all the time because my mind is immediately like, how can I turn this into something big and build an empire and blah, 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 blah. Like, that's just how my mind is. That's immediately where I go. And I think a lot of times, like with especially more of those like artistic, creative endeavors, sometimes I just have to I tell my husband, I'm like, okay, I just need to do this just because it makes me happy. Like, I really want to learn how to sew so I can make pillows. And I don't know how many, I don't need a lot of pillows, but I just want to make pillows. And I'm like, immediately my mind's like, well, I can, do these great designs and I could sell it on, online and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And I'm like, no, Annette, like just do it because it makes you happy. Because I think exactly for the reason you say, because once you do it, like you feel like you're starting to do it for others, you start attaching like standards to it. You end up resenting it after a while. And so I think
you totally do.
it takes the fun out of it because you're like, I have to think about the costs and the profit margins and blah, blah, blah. I love that you have just created this project for yourself that just makes you happy. And I think in terms of looking forward, who cares? Just don't pay attention. Just like try your hardest to not lose that intention for it, that it was something that just brought you joy. It was a creative outlet for you. And then it's just going to impact the words that come out, and it won't be fun anymore.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. And I am kind of at that point now that I did it to myself. Nobody told me like I had to write a book, let alone 3 in 1 year. Like nobody did it but me. And I have found that now that I set this goal for myself to have this 3rd one out in the fall, there was a period of time where I just couldn't even bear to look at the story on my laptop because I was like, oh my God, like I have to finish this. People are waiting, and nobody's waiting for it. Nobody knows about me. Like, maybe my mom is, but that's about it. So, but then I kind of took a step back and I was like, no, like it's not because I need to publish it because people are waiting. I just want to have this personal goal for myself, and I'm writing it because I want to. And so, yeah, I want to set some sort of standard in terms of, having that goal to have it published by X date. But if it doesn't happen, I'm not going to beat myself up over it. Like, it's not a big deal.
It wasn't time.
Yeah.
And you can always publish under a pen name. So that takes care of like the pressure, but that would, I guess, defeat your purpose of having a series. So awesome. Well, I don't know how you do it. I don't know where you find that creative fuel, but it's just so inspiring to me to see just how you're not putting yourself in a box. You're just following your passion or your curiosity, and it's like leading you to these kind of fun and quirky endeavors.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It always like makes me like, I'm like blushing right now. It just, I just think it's funny. Like people do tell me, oh, like you're so inspiring. And I'm like, what? Like I'm just me. Like if I could do it, there are definitely other people who could. And,
but
I think
it's really hard to be just me, kind of, just to be you. I'm sorry I interrupted. Go ahead.
No, that's totally fine. I think, like you kind of said before, I think it's easy to look at someone's, business or, their social media and be like, oh, they are so great. They do all this, they do all that. But at the end of the day, it's really about doing the work, and you just have to sit down. And if you want something to happen, you got to make it happen, and nobody's going to hand it to you. It's not just going to fall in your lap. So I fully believe if someone wants to do something, they can. They just have to actually do it.
Yeah, that's the hard part. That's the hard part. There's so many reasons why people don't just do it. But if you can overcome it and you can just get it in motion, amazing things can happen. So with that said, I think this is a perfect time to just wrap things up with one question that I love to ask my guests, which is one thing I know for sure is, and you can go ahead and fill in the blank.
Oh boy, the pressure. Okay, one thing I know for sure is that things change. I'm going to leave it at that.
Dun, dun, dun. To be continued.
Well, no, I just mean, nothing is permanent. So whether that's good or bad, I think it's always good to be aware of that. So you remember to appreciate the good things that happen, and it gives you something to sort of realize in bad times, hey, things could change. They could change tomorrow. They could change. I could get a phone call as soon as we hang up, and it could change my life, for better or worse. So yeah, I think it's just about having fun in the meantime and just putting your all into whatever you want to do and just taking it as it comes and not overthinking it and not putting too much pressure on it.
Well said. So Jessica, thank you so much for being here. We're going to put in the show notes all the amazing places people can find you on the internet, because there's so many places that you're at. Yeah. So thank you for being here and for sharing your insight and your happiness and your joy with us.
So there you go. You can pretty much build a business around anything, even confetti, as long as there's passion and creativity behind it. If you'd like to learn more about Jessica, hop on over to the show notes over at AnnetteStepanian.com/podcast. And if you're enjoying these conversations, make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes. With that said, I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will talk to you later.